Hi, welcome to Ask Me Anything Office Hours. My name is Dan Merrick. I'm the director of plant-based culinary for Rouxbe Online Culinary School, and this during this section, we actually take the time out to answer questions from students all over the world about any culinary questions you might have. Now, just a little housekeeping on this. To do that, all you have to do is click on the box on the right side of this video, type in your question, and hit add. Our moderator, Patrick, will go through them to make sure that they work out for our situation. Today, I'm a plant based chef, so I don't really answer too many things on how to prepare meats or anything like that because it's just outside of my knowledge base. But as long as it meets that criteria, no pun intended, we'll add it to our list and it'll pop up on the right hand side. You can always click the heart icon next to a question if you'd like that question to be answered a little bit quicker than some of the other ones as well. Just as a reminder, we're not able to answer any medical kind of questions. So if you're looking to treat something on a medical aspect, we're not allowed to do that because I'm actually a chef, not a doctor. All right. I feel like I have to sneeze, so pardon me if I do. All right. So let's dig right in there with Eugene. Hello, Chef Dan. Does the way you prepare tofu have anything to do with health benefits? That's actually a great question, Eugene. So there are a lot of different ways that you can prepare tofu. Some of them are healthier than others. Traditionally, well, typically when I'm baking it or making it, I'm going to bake it instead of doing like a deep fry or something like that, where I'll do like a nice coating on it or something like that, or marinate it, and then I'll put it in the oven, usually about 350 degrees for about 15 minutes, and then flip it over again, and do another 15 minutes as well. Now I'll take that product then, and then I'll do like a saute and a stir fry or something like that. I'll also use it for sandwiches, or very popular at my house for doing like tofu sandwiches after they've been marinated as well. Now, there are also a lot of unhealthy ways to do that. A lot of people will do deep fried tofu, which is great for certain situations. You can coat it in like a cornstarch, and do a deep fry and get a really crispy outside of it. Not the healthiest way to have tofu, but definitely something that's very tasty. So, there are a lot of different ways to be able to do that. Some, are healthier than others, just depending on the method that you choose. All right, I have another one from Eugene. Actually, it looks like a couple here. When teaching plant based eating and cooking classes for certain chronic conditions, how do you determine what to charge per class? So that really kind of depends on your demographic on what to be able to charge for the class. So if you're doing something for, um, you know, like if you're doing something for specifically for like a hospital, and the hospital's going to be covering your costs, you might be able to charge a little bit more for that just because they're going to have a larger budget for something like that as a class. But if you're doing it for somebody like a group of people that are, just out in the general public and they have a chronic condition, it depends on the socioeconomic status as well. So, right, if you're going into like a lower income neighborhood, you'd want to bring the cost of the class significantly down, just to be able to let people afford to take your class, to be able to get the knowledge base that you're learning as well. So, I usually kind of look at that first to see like kind of where I'm at, to be able to charge for the class. There are also some other key things that you just can't really mess with too much. One of those is ingredients, right? So how much are your ingredients going to cost for the recipes you're going to do? If you need to bring the price down, you need to rethink about what ingredients you're going to be able to use for those classes. To make it more affordable for yourself and for the demographic that you're teaching to. Um, that's the same case if you're teaching at like a hospital or something like that as well. You want to make sure that it's approachable for people when they leave the hospital to be able to, utilize and also have access to the ingredients that you're using. So those are probably the biggest signifiers that I'd put in to be able to say on how to charge per class for that type of event. The cost of ingredients, of course, your time as well are really big kind of areas to kind of look at that to see how to charge. All right, and I see Eugene, you have another one here. Would you recommend roasting or air frying? That kind of depends. I don't personally own an air fryer, but I've lived with people that have and have used them and stuff like that. It's basically like a convection oven, basically in a very small size, which is great. But typically I use roasting more often than I'm going to do air frying. Even if I have an air fryer in hand, I'm just used to using the method of roasting, which you can do just in an oven. You can use the convection feature on it if you have it in your oven as well too, to get that nice crispiness that you're looking for on those vegetables. So I typically use roasting, but if you're in a pinch and you don't have the oven space, an air fryer will do just fine. There's nothing wrong with using the air fryer as well too. Um, Now, most air fryers will say just to put a little bit of spray oil or something on it, which, if you're okay with using oil, that's easy to do. You can do roasting in an air fryer without oil as well. You don't get it as crisp as you would for those two. For roasting in an oven, I'll typically roast it and I'll do like a veg stock, or something on it. But then I'll put broil on just for a couple seconds to help crisp it up, kind of at the end, which you can't do in an air fryer. All right, our next question is Roxanne. How do I freeze fresh herbs and will they look and taste well in fresh raw recipes? Thank you. So, freezing herbs is actually a wonderful thing to do. You can do it with all kinds of different herbs. There are kind of a couple different methods to do. One of them is to just wash them off, and then you can pat them off and then chop them all up into the pieces that you'd like at the finished project, basically. And then what I like to do is put them into like the silicone ice cube trays that you can get. And I'll put those in there. And I have one just for herbs because if you're using them with herbs, your ice is going to smell like that later. So I have one I'd use just for that. I'll put it into those ice cube containers and I'll either fill that with water or I'll fill it with a neutral oil. A lot of people like to use olive oil as well too. But then you can just take that, like say basil, it's already chopped, and you can take the oil cube or the water cube and put it right into your pan to be able to add the flavor. Now you can also just wash them off really well, dry them afterward, and then put them into like a baggie and put them in your freezer, and they'll freeze like that. And you can kind of just break off as you need to. I typically use the method where I'm going to put it into either an oil or a water. And I do that specifically because I'm putting it into the pan and it's easy for me to use. But I've known a lot of people have just done the freezer bag, if you will, technique, and it works well for them. Now, using them in raw dishes is going to be a little tough because you'll see that, like basil is my example again. The basil is going to darken significantly after being frozen. So if you're putting it into a raw dish, it's not going to look quite the same as, say, if you're using a fresh basil on the top of it. So keep that in mind a little bit. For raw, it's a little bit harder to be able to use the frozen ones. It's not like they won't work. It's just the herbs discolor a little bit after you do freeze them as well. It's also something that you don't want to let them freeze and just, like if you're thawing them, if they're in like the water ice cube, you want to use them pretty quickly. Like you can thaw them in an ice cube bowl and like get them through that. But again, you want to use them pretty darn quickly to be able to get the full flavor and the appealing look out of them as well too. So you definitely can freeze them. And I would use one of those three methods, either ice cube method with either water or oil. Or the third method is to put them dry into a freezer bag. And then you can kind of, pinch them off as you need to. More often, I will use dried herbs than frozen herbs. And just to be able to, you already know what the flavor is going to be. It's pretty consistent. And you know what the color is going to be as well too. Whereas the frozen herb, even if you're taking it out and it still looks very green in the ice cube, you'll notice that once it gets in the dish and starts to cook a bit, it's going to brown up a little bit. I hope that helps. All right, our next one, Susan. Does maple syrup, fruit paste, etc., healthier sugars substitute one to one essentially in a recipe that calls for granulated sugar? I began swapping out ingredients. Thank you. So they don't actually substitute one to one for granulated sugar. Um, the fruit pastes and maple syrups, even agaves, stuff like that, you definitely need to either look up a conversion specifically for the recipe type that you're doing or do a little bit of experimentation with those. They definitely react very different than a granulated sugar. So, something like a fruit paste in a muffin recipe will give you a lot more moisture in that muffin, which could be great to keep it moist, but it also might be too much moisture and you might need to cook it a little bit longer too. So your recipe is going to alter a little bit if you're using a 1 to 1 ratio. Typically, you're not going to use as much of a fruit paste or something like that. But for maple syrup, it could be a little bit more, right? So, and again, that's also depending if you're doing a baking recipe versus if you're doing like maybe like a stir fry that asks for brown sugar in it or something like that. Very different kinds of things in those. So, each one of those kinds of situations is going to be different, but it's usually not a 1 to 1 ratio. Hope that helps a little bit. So it's just doing a little bit of research on each of the recipes you're doing the swapping out for. Hope that helps, Susan. Cindy, hi, Chef Marek. Do you make plant based cheese? And if so, what do you use to make it firm and sliceable? Thank you. I do make plant based cheese. Some of them I make sliceable, some of them are kind of like a chev kind of a style. The ones that are sliceable, I typically use an agar in it. And you can buy agar basically in a powder form and you can add it to things and it works like a gelatin form. In fact, our plant-based pro course and our plants plus both have a great recipe that Char Nolan, great friend and instructor, came up with and uses in that class as well too. It's if you're in plant-based pro, definitely look at the alternatives in there for cheese, and you'll find that in there. But agar is typically a really good way to be able to make plant-based cheese sliceable. Now, there are a lot of other ways that are traditional ways of making cheese as well, but you can make them out of other things like cashews, nuts, and other things as well. And using cheesecloths, different professional techniques to be able to make that happen as well, depending on what kind of cheese you're making and what you're starting with as an ingredient. But typically agar is kind of the one thing I go to. I don't have like a cheese cave for vegan cheese or anything like that. And I will occasionally make a cashew one that I'll squeeze out with cheesecloth and let it kind of sit for a while, and it becomes sliceable, but it's not like sliceable like you would cut like a piece of cheddar or something like that. And put it like on a sandwich, but it would hold up to be like on a cracker or something like that, just fine. But the agar does a really good job of that. All right. Sanjita, I'm 30-year-old tech professional who does not want to delay anymore and make a shift in her life by pursuing a career in food, a food critic and food blogger. Great. How best can I get started and make this move efficiently? The best way to be able to start a career change like that is really to start doing it while you're doing whatever you're doing now. Specifically, being a food critic or food blogger, start doing it while you're doing whatever job you're also doing at the same time. Put up a website, start writing in lots. I have a journalism background. I went to the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism, was a professional writer for years and years. And the key to being a writer is really writing all the time, and publishing all the time. So you can start out by doing like reviews of cookbooks. You can do different recipes and explore with those. You can take family recipes, print them out, and be able to utilize those as well. Um, you can start doing food critics on your own, just representing yourself as well too. You don't have to tell anybody you're going in to be the food critic. You would still just pay just like you normally would and everything, but you can put out reviews in that same way. Now, I wouldn't do things like the uh, like Yelp or anything like that. You can put your reviews on there if you'd like to, but I would probably stick to more having them on a website of your own to be able to start publishing, and then use that as a portfolio. So after you're doing it for a bit, pick out your best 10 articles, and use those to show your best work to a publisher. So if you're going to a local magazine or a local newspaper, you can show some of the things that you've written in the past. And it just kind of basically uses steps like that to be able to kind of increase where you're going and what you want to do as a critic or food blogger. So, best advice for you is start writing and writing a lot. I hope that helps. Linda, how can we diversify protein alternative to tofu, seitan, and beans? How can we diversify our all or all? Okay, how can we diversify protein alternatives? So you're looking for alternatives to tofu, seitan, and beans with a high protein source. Like those are really good ones. If in there, I'd also do a tempeh as well too. But quinoa is a really good source of protein as well. So that might be something you want to start incorporating into your diet as well. And it depends on how much protein you're looking to get. So there's this common misnomer that we need a ton of protein in our diets, and most people, you can find out when they're going vegan or vegetarian, that you don't actually need as much protein as you think you do. Now, if you're younger and you're growing and you still are developing bones and stuff like that, that's different. Like I look at my kids' diet very differently than I do compared on the protein and fat that I give my kids compared to what I ingest myself. Um, but you do get a lot of protein just out of all kinds of different vegetables as well, and you'll be surprised to find it in all kinds of other things, like even like bagels and breads. The amount of protein that are in those kinds of things as well too. So, kind of start looking at different labels of some of the things that you're eating, and look for the protein sources that way. If you're just trying to stay away from beans, kind of altogether, being the tofu, say, and tofu, beans, and tempeh, there are a lot of grains that have a good amount of protein in them as well. And start looking into those just a little bit. You'll find different levels of protein in all kinds of those. And because you're doing it from grains, you can mix and match a lot of different ways too, which is great. All right, Rebecca, if I get sick, can I ask for an extension of my classes? Do I need a doctor's note? Great question, Rebecca. So usually we do offer things like that. You just have to contact our support desk, and they'll kind of tell you the steps to be able to do to be able to get through that. But we're pretty lenient on that. If somebody's like, has a big illness or they can't do the course for something for a little bit, we might be able to pause it or extend it for something. Usually we put those caps on it for people to get it done within a certain amount of time. So we do, I'm not sure if you'll need a doctor's note at all, but I'm sure that our support desk will help you with that. So definitely reach out to them. Great people. Tell Deanne I said hello. All right, Linda, my stainless steel pans and skillets seem to be staining, showing ring level where red rice was cooked, or I overheated the pan before cooking. Are my pans unhealthy? So I know that brand well, and if it's a stainless steel, you should be doing pretty good. Now, the staining process, I know what you're talking about. It's like the little ring that comes around the top of the pan where your water level started out. And quite honestly, it's probably just putting a lot of elbow grease into cleaning that out a little bit. Um, I don't think you overheated the pan before cooking, but it might be a little bit from that. But it doesn't sound like your pans are unhealthy. That will happen around the top ring of pans, and I have like very expensive steel pans that'll do the exact same thing. And mostly, it's just giving it or putting a lot of elbow grease in to be able to get all of that off. But that's not an unhealthy thing at all. That's just kind of the acidity or whatever it is just going around that top. But just using a good dish soap to be able to get that out should be able to take that ring right off of your pan. And don't worry about the unhealthiness of it, because if you're using a stainless steel pan just like that, you should be just fine. All right, Sarah Kim, have you ever taught a live healthy cooking class for youth? And if so, how did you get started? Yeah, I have taught hundreds of cooking classes for kids. I think that the best way to be able to start off is to know the demographic. Once again, so we were talking earlier about, having live classes. So if you're doing live classes for kids, you have to be able to think about what you can do for the cooking class to keep them entertained. It's very different from adults, although you have to keep them entertained just as much. But you have to be able to give them things they can do themselves. And that can be the challenging part of doing kids' classes. Are they old enough to hold like a plastic serrated knife? Are they able to chop with those things? Are they old enough to use a real knife? Are there things where you just want to be able to have them dump and pour into the top of something like a blender or a food processor? Then they push the button and see it all blend up like a pesto or something like that, where they can do, tearing off of basil leaves and like, dump and pour kind of recipes instead of doing all the chopping of those things too. So those are some of the big things you want to kind of think about is how old the kids are, how you keep them entertained as well, and then the how much you charge with that kind of comes along with that is the cost of your ingredients and your time as well. But the biggest thing for getting started is just to think of a couple different classes that you can do that are going to keep the kids at the age demographic you're looking at entertained. If they're little kids, think about things that they can just pull off things and put them into stuff. If they're older, if they're like teenage level, like, it's great for them to be able to use real knives and learn real techniques. It's a good thing for them to be able to learn all kinds of different techniques at that age. My kids are a little different, being, my kids, they cook often in the kitchen. And they're used to using, real equipment at 4 and 6 year old. But it's something we've kind of worked up to gradually. My youngest, who's 4, loves to bake and just kind of, anything baking related. She wants to be able to get in there and stir everything and pour all the things in the molds and stuff like that as well too. And she loves that kind of thing. My oldest is more not as much into the baking aspect, but loves to be able to kind of chop things up and just leave the chopped up stuff and I'll use it into a dish. And that's just fine. So kind of think about that as well too, on what skill level the kids have that you might be cooking for. Because 4 and 6 year olds of some other person will be completely different than the ones that I have. And you have to kind of think about that and talk to parents before you actually do the classes. All right, our next one, Chris. I'm taking the plant based class to get better ideas for my vegan guest. I'm having problems finding ingredients at my local grocery store that's 45-minute drive. Do you have any suggestions on substitutes? Well, Chris, that completely depends on the recipe or in the ingredients that you're looking for. So, it can be hard to find some ingredients at just local grocery stores, especially if it's a 45-minute drive. You don't want to waste your time. Now, some items can be ordered online, so you can find out places that um, you might be able to find things online that can be delivered to your house instead of having to drive the 45 minutes. Um, Also, start looking, if it's hard to find ingredients, if it's something to a specific cuisine, you might actually want to be able to look up like the traits of that cuisine. So, like an Indian grocery store or an Asian grocery store. So, I find that a lot of times my normal grocery store won't have things that I would find in a specialty grocery store like that. So, if you just do a Google search on finding an Indian grocer near me or an Asian grocer near me, you might be able to find something that's close to that 45-minute circle to be able to find the ingredients. Also, ask people at the grocery store. Pardon me. Sometimes it's good to find somebody who's in charge of a department. So if you're looking for something like tofu, you might want to ask the grocery department or produce department lead to be able to find that specific ingredient because they'll know exactly where it is compared to, say, like the 15-year-old stocking the shelf. So look for somebody that's at the grocery store, ask for the specific ingredients to be able to see. If they don't carry them, ask where you might be able to find them or do a Google search on a specific market that's near you as well. Hope that helps a little bit. It's a little hard without knowing exactly what you're looking to substitute. We usually try to help people with that as well too, to be able to help them find ways to be able to get the ingredients that you need for the courses as well. All right. Cecilia, what are your cooking recommendations for someone who has lost their sense of smell? Oof. So I got sick, was that last year, and had that happen to me. And it was pretty tough because it was just not as appealing to me. I think that the best thing for cooking for somebody who's lost their sense of smell is to be able to still just focus on good food. One thing you want to focus on a little bit more is texture as well, right? To be able to make it so it's interesting. So if you're just eating bites of things that are like pudding all the time, it's not going to be very interesting at all. But if you add a little bit of crunch to that, it's going to be different. I'm not saying you should put crunch into pudding, but I guess you could. But think about what things are going to be very herbaceous, be big flavors, to see if they have a very small amount of smell or taste. That would be able to kind of help out with that. But I guess you're saying without their loss of smell, but it might be taste as well. So yeah, I think that's probably one of the biggest recommendations I would say is cook what you're cooking for everybody else, but also think about texture that's involved in this as well, along with just your normal nutrition, right? So, really good nutrition, texture, and then also look for big flavors that kind of pop that will kind of go through a little bit because you'll be surprised sometimes. Even my mother-in-law who's lost her sense of taste a long time ago. There are certain dishes I make for her where she'll be like, "Wow, I can taste that," and it's amazing because it's just a big pop of flavor. So, short answer, cook the way you would for everybody else. Make sure it's very nutritious and add some diversity into it by adding texture. All right. Maria, can you suggest the way to transfer photos from my Android smartphone to a Ruby course assignment? So, that sounds like a question for our support department. They actually do that pretty often for people. You should be able to upload directly to the Ruby course, but I'm not 100% sure. You'd have to talk to our department on that one. Suzanne, can you recommend a portable induction cooktop for trying induction cooking? I'm not going to recommend a specific brand of one. There are a lot of great brands that are out there for them. But what I am going to recommend for you, if you're just trying induction cooking, is to not spend a ton of money and go to your local restaurant supply store. And they typically will have portable cooktops. I use ones that have like little gas burners all the time for doing cooking demonstrations, but they also do have induction ones. Now, I'm telling you to go to a restaurant supply store because they're also going to have ones that are kind of like, it's an introductory, you know, type uh, cooktop, basically. So you're not going to be spending a ton of money on it. And you're also going to get a good representation of what it is because professionals are basically using these all the time. So they're going to give you a good one, but it's not going to be like the very top end one. You're not going to be spending like, $400 or $500 on this. It's probably more like 80 to $100 on that. And that'll kind of be a good mid-range induction portable cooktop to be able to go. So that's what I would do is recommend going to your local restaurant supply and seeing what they have on those. Lisa, what are the disadvantages or disadvantages of using a whetstone versus a steel for sharpening a chef's knife? So those are two very different things. A steel is like a longer kind of tube looking thing that is ridged on the side, and you're using it to hone your knife. So if you're looking, if this is your knife edge like this, the tip of your knife edge is going to start kind of tipping over like that because as you're cutting it, the steel starts to bend a little bit on the very edge. Now, if you're honing it, what you're doing is taking that edge and kind of straightening it out, going back and forth on either side like that. So that's what that doing. The honing tool is kind of moving it into that shape that you originally wanted, into that V at the end, instead of being kind of curved over like that. So that'll help to do that. Now, the whetstone is it's basically when you put your knife on your whetstone and you're going by like that, you're actually taking your kind of you're kind of carving off some of the metal to be able to get the edge that you're looking. So it's shaping it in a very different way. Instead of just kind of knocking the edge off like that, the whetstone's going to bring it to a very specific sharp point, sharpening the knife instead of just honing the knife. So the whetstone is something you want to do. The steel is something you want to do very often. I do it probably every couple times I use a knife. where the whetstone is something I might do every 4 to 6 months, depending on how much you cook. Like when I was working in the kitchens a lot, I would have to sharpen my knife with a whetstone probably every month to month and a half. But in a home environment, you might be like every 6 months to a year, just depending on how much you're using that knife. So, sharpening versus honing. Shar. Well, here's Shar Nolan. I was just talking about her earlier. Great to see you. We were just talking about agar, your agar cheese recipe earlier. Dan, what is your favorite Ruby recipe that you make for your family? That's fun because I've come up with a lot of them for Ruby, but kind of honestly, the one that I make the most is the chickpea chicken salad recipe, which is it's basically just chickpeas, either a cashew cream or a mayo, and pickles. We do granulated garlic, and I think it's the tuna salad is the one we have, the chickpea tuna salad, and then seaweed. But I actually take the seaweed out of it. I take the garlic granules out of it and the onion granules out, and I just do a very simple version because my kids love it. They eat it all the time. It is something that I pack for their school lunches. It is something that they ask for, like in a taco form, quite often as well too. But yeah, the chickpea salad recipe is definitely kind of one of the hands down winners of our family. My everybody in my family, including my two kids, know how to make it. They like to taste how much pickle juice to be able to put into it as well too. Oh, there's the recipe. Thanks, Patrick, for putting it up there. And the great thing is you can kind of switch it up. There's an adult version versus a kid's version that you can do. You can do it really quickly with a vegan mayo instead of doing a cashew cream if you're short on time. Um, it lasts a while too. So in a kid's lunch, I'm not worried about it, spoiling or anything like that. And it's a good amount of protein and fat at the same time, which is great for kids. So that's probably one of my favorites that kind of go to for Ruby that I utilize all the time. There's another one that I did recently for Plants Pro. It's the crab cakes that I like to do for adults. It's definitely more of an adult dish, but my kids do love that one as well. And that is using chickpeas and what is it, artichoke? I think it is artichoke and chickpeas, where you blend those all up, and they make a magnificent crab cake with a great texture on that. And then just serve it with a little house-made tartar sauce with that too. Just a great dish. But thanks for asking, Shar. Great to see you on here. All right. Well, that takes us to the very end of our Ask Me Anything hours. It's a short one today, but thanks for asking the questions. And we'll see you next time for Ask Me Anything hours.